Hey, we're back with another lick of the week, and I thought I would talk about some blues for the next few videos. There are a lot of blues and bluegrass music, and if you're going to be a good Scruggs style banjo player, you need to know a little bit about how blues function on the fingerboard, because a lot of the really classic solos you hear have some pretty heavy blues influences in it. Bluegrass music in general is made up of, Celtic influences with African blues influences and Appalachian music all mixed together. So there's a heavy dose of blues in bluegrass music anyway, and if you're going to be a traditional Scruggs style player, you need to know some bluesy licks, because you hear it all throughout traditional bluegrass banjo over the last 50 years or so. So let's start with a basic understanding of what a blues scale is. If you take any normal scale, let's say a G major scale, which is G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and G, and you modify that by flatting or dropping the value of certain notes a half step or 1 fret, we wind up with G, A, B flat, C, D flat, E, and F as being our G blues scale. Now, that may be hard to remember, especially if you're jamming or playing solo and you don't really have time to think about that. And you can practice finding the blues scale note, anywhere on the fingerboard. You may want to try playing your normal G scale as you normally do, and then modifying it to flat the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th notes out of that scale, and it will give you a G blues scale. And again, this is universal. It applies to any major scale, but we're just going to talk about G since it's an easy place to start. But I like to teach my students, and I hope this works for you, is to relate the G blues notes or blues scale to positions on the neck. Let's start with the number 1 chord shape, which people refer to as the F shape. And we already have a G note here. We have a B note. We have a D. And we have another G, and then we have the 5th string, which is also a G. Now, if we use this little rule which says to modify a G major scale into a G blues scale, we change the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th notes, and we drop them 1/2 step. Well, on a fretted instrument, 1/2 step is the same as 1 fret. So what we need to do is change our our B note, which is the 3rd note of the scale, to a B flat. We need to find that D note and change it to a D flat, and then the F sharp note that's usually in the scale we change back to this. So what happens is, if you think positionally on the banjo, without even really having to memorize what the notes are themselves, you can physically remember where the notes are located in and around this chord shape. So now we have an F note, which we know belongs in that blues scale. Here's an F, here's an F. So we have 2 different octaves of F. So those would be our blues notes. We have a B flat note, which is also in that blues scale. And now the D flat goes a little outside the box here. We have to move either here or we have to go up to here to find the D flat. The E note can be right here, and the F can be right here. So now watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to relate this G blues scale, or these notes that we found, and try to stay inside of this chord shape as much as possible. So I don't want to go too far away from this shape. Here's F, G, B flat, here's a C, which is a scale note. I could go up 1 for D flat, blues scale note. Okay, here's my E, here's my F, blues scale note, and here's back to G. So what happens is, inside the parameters or the location of this F shape, you pretty much have all the blues scale notes right under your fingers. You just have to modify the shape a little bit to be able to find them. So now if I scroll straight across from 3rd fret to 5th fret, listen to what I get. F, G, B flat, C, D, which is not a blues scale note, but it is a G scale note, E, F, which is a blues scale note, and G. So the only note I'm really missing from that G blues is D flat. So I could either find it here behind the D note, or right here, C sharp, D flat, same note. So a lot of the classic Scruggs blues licks you hear out of this shape or out of this formation are based on the blues scale notes that intersect the F-shaped chord, which is really neat. What does that mean in practical terms? That means that without having to really stop and think about what are the names of these notes, which hopefully I hope you can get to do sometime. I mean, you can practice these, but when it comes time to actually play blues ideas, you don't really have time to think about, oh, which one of these are flatted thirds, flatted fifths. That's something you practice at home. But physically, if you think about the shape and memorize this pattern, you will have all of the blues scale notes for that particular chord, say for a G major chord. That automatically gives you all the notes of a G blues scale minus 1, which will be that flatted fifth. So here's the flatted 7th note, here's the flatted 3rd note, and the flatted 5th will be either here or here. So if I want to blues it up and make it 100% correct, have to include that D flat note. But just for practice purposes, it's okay to actually play the D note here. And if you want to add the D flat, you can. You can actually do cool things like play a chromatic interval, which is to go from the blues scale note, D flat, to the D. And it makes the blues a little bluesier, a little greasier sounding. Now, a lot of blues depends on bent notes, so, or what we call chokes in bluegrass. So a tremendous amount of inflection happens in bluegrass banjo where players are trying to emulate what they've heard blues players do on the guitar, which is to bend notes. And there's a pretty important reason why you bend a note in blues, but I'm not going to get into it in this video. But suffice it to say that it's, without thinking about it in theory terms, it's a big part of what makes blues music what it is on a string instrument, is bending notes. So instead of actually going right to, say, the D flat note, I can actually do a bend that almost gets me to the D flat note, and it has that really cool bending sound. So a lot of the classic bluegrass Scruggs style banjo licks you hear actually have their origins in this location of the fingerboard, which is any F-shaped chord. Now what's great about this is, without having to think what are the names of the notes again, which is something that's important to know, but it's more important to physically know what's happening on the fingerboard. So since this is a movable chord shape, guess what? If I want to play that same kind of bent scale or blues scale, I can move this up to A, and I can reproduce the same licks, because again I'm not playing any open strings unless I can find an open string that's the note I need. I can move this to B, and I can play blues notes out of B. I can go anywhere on the fingerboard, all 12 major keys, and by modifying the shape and realizing where those blues tones are, I can make blues scale notes. So practice with this number 1 shape, and then in the next video we're going to talk a little more in detail about what's going on with these blues notes, and maybe break down some classic sounding licks in Scruggs style. I appreciate it. See you next week.